Arnold from Shiny Happy People. I am excited to see her. She and I have met previously. She was there in Chicago, actually, when we went to testify for the sanctions put on against us. And so she at the time was doing a documentary. And then we reconnected and saw that she was in Shiny Happy People. So I'm excited to talk with you today. Can you introduce yourself to our followers?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Brooke Arnold. Um, I grew up in IBLP slash ATI, whatever you want to call it. There's so many names. And I left when I was about 17, 18. Ages are hard when you're not like going to school every year.
Yes.
Everything kind of blends together in like a long sequence of denim dresses and church services. And so I was a part of Shiny Happy People, which is kind of the Bill Gothard expose documentary. I actually worked on my own version of a Bill Gothard documentary for quite some years, which is why I was in Chicago for the hearing, and also, of course, to support everybody. Um, and right now, I am on a 50-state journey around the United States in a van. So if you see cars driving by me or you see flies, that's why.
I am so jealous of that. That is like my lifelong dream is to have a van.
Yeah, it had been a dream of mine for many, many years. And after the pandemic, I was kind of like, it's time to, make that a reality. The reality of it is very different than the kind of the Instagram idea or the perception of what it's like. It's definitely a little bit harder and you're a little bit dirtier and
Yes.
a little bit more tired than you think you would be, but yeah, it's really fun.
It looks beautiful on Instagram. I can imagine in real life, it's like, whoa, this is a little bit more challenging, but it's still a dream of mine. Someday, I hope to do
Right,
that.
yeah, you take beautiful pictures of where you're camping and then coyotes come into your camp and keep you up all night. So
Oh my gosh, that would be a little scary.
yeah, it can be scary at times. Don't worry, I've got pepper spray.
My gosh, I love it. And so today we want to talk about teachings of the Shiny Head people. And I was just telling Brooke, I feel like she has such a gift of being able to articulate very clearly and explain these teachings in a way. I mean, you did phenomenal in Shiny Head people. We were all so proud of you. Just seeing your authenticity and you explain it so clearly and give us the picture of your kind of the main feature. I feel like that was talking and walking us through it. And then as we were talking too, these teachings still are around. They still are in our Christian culture and still in circles, and they still promote abuse today. And then we were talking too about the recovery journey a little bit. Like, what's it like to come out of something that is so used to separate all those things. So I'm looking forward to just having a conversation today about this. And so I'll let you just kind of maybe take it away and we can start with talking about some of the teachings, explaining the culture and how it perpetrated abuse.
Okay. Well, I guess, do you want me to kind of give like an overview of the organization for people out there who might not be familiar with it?
Yes, an overview would be good. And then, yes, that would be good. Just a brief overview would be wonderful.
Okay. So what we're talking about is the Institute in Basic Life Principles, also called IBLP. Since Shiny Happy People came out, everyone's calling it the IBLP, but that really bugs me. That's not that we've
No,
never said that. Have you ever heard that before?
no, I didn't know that was a thing. I've never.
Yeah, that's like a new hip happening thing, the IBLP. So the Institute in Basic Life Principles is a parachurch organization started by a man named Bill Gothard in the 1960s. And originally his ministry was centered on keeping your kids from being rebellious, right? We got to think about in the 1960s, we had this moment where rebellion and questioning authority was kind of being celebrated in the mainstream in a very, very real way. And I think this really frightened people. I think that this idea that our institutions aren't trustworthy, that the people in authority over us can't be trusted, was a pretty radical idea. And I think it frightened a lot of people. And there were a lot of people who were looking for alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
How do I raise my kid in the era of rock and roll? How do I raise my kids in, the era of college protests? And so I think they were really drawn to Bill Gothard because, he has a formula for success. You follow this formula, you do A and B, and then C happens. And I think that in a moment of like where there's a lot of cultural upheaval happening, I think that was really appealing to a lot of people.
Yes, and that is so true. And then he started the homeschool curriculum in 1984. So there, which was, yeah, 30, 40 years ago. So now we're actually seeing children, the people I feel like that kind of came out were the children that were raised in this program. Were able to speak out to, this is the impacts that this had on me being raised in this. Are you still there or did you freeze? Oh, let's see. Hold on. She's frozen. Let me text her. But I'll keep sharing until she comes back. And so we were talking about how it was the homeschool curriculum was started, and that was based on basically Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and was used as a way to breed control through these teachings. So it was his own view of Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and everything was based off of those scriptures. And so we learned about, such as Jesus come out in the scene. Oh, she's gone completely. Hold on, y'all. Bear with me. Let me see if I can call her in. And we were going to figure this out because I really want her to tell this very quickly. All right, I am calling her in until we can get there. But anyway, so we're going to kind of go further into that and about the teachings. And I would like her to be able to do that because it's a lot more. Oh, I've got you live.
My phone overheated.
Oh, well, I've got you live here. So I'm going to let you talk until you can come back live in person. But you're you're live. So we stopped and I had just said that the teachings, he started the homeschool teachings in 1984. And so I'll just let you kind of explain more about that. I was going into Matthew 5, 6, and 7 and what that was based upon. But I was like, you would be a lot better explaining this than me.
You're breaking up. I don't know if it's because of. I'm so sorry. I'm just like I was just kicking the wall when you called because I'm like.
Oh, it is okay. I can hear you clearly. If you just want to talk about IBLP's homeschool curriculum.
Yeah. So IBLP kind of started with these seminars in the 1960s that were intended to help parents keep their children, remain within the faith and not become part of this rebellious rock and roll culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1918, and this was covered in the Los Angeles Times, yes. Christianity Today. He was part of a scandal in which he was found to be using his teachings to convince, to basically sexually harass women, coerce them, to be a sexual predator.
Yes. Yes.
And the key, key teaching that he used to do this was his authority at teaching, the umbrella of authority.
Yes.
And this teaching is, completely extra biblical. It's not something that you find within the Bible at all. But the idea is that there's this, very strict chain of command that starts with God, and then it goes to Bill Gothard, and then it's your pastor, and then it's the father/husband, then it's the wife/mother, then it's the children, and then it's the dog. And then there's this like long chain of command in which God beats Bill, Bill beats the pastor, pastor beats dad, dad beats mom, mom beats kids, and kids beat dog,
Poor dog.
And it creates this kind of cycle of abuse, this chain of abuse, this tacitly and kind of implicitly sanctioned abuse.
Yes, absolutely. And I think so many people think or and make it good, when in fact it's rooted in control. That's what it was created for, it to create a culture of control. With Bill Gothard was up top, like he was always above the fathers. I mean, he basically told me that one time. Yes, I came back from visiting my family and he told me I had darkness. He felt he was losing my heart. And so he then told me that my dad had umbrella had holes in it and that only he was strong enough to protect me. And so if I went home, it would Satan would be able to get a hold of me, which is basically what you're taught when you step outside this umbrella. It's Satan's lurching there to destroy you, and he will give you temptations that are so strong for you you can't resist, and these temptations will destroy you. And so he told me I had to stay with him to keep me safe. So
and I find that so, that's a pattern with him, taking girls and then telling them, your father is no longer the authority over you. I'm now God's appointed authority over you. And then using that to control, groom, prey on them in every way. And so it's like the people such as myself who are kind of like in the homeschool program, but not at the headquarters, right? Our dad is the kind of the cult leader and the authority, and we have that absolute authority. But then once you kind of start getting pulled into Bill Gothard's more inner circle, or you start getting close to him, or you're one of, unfortunately, the girls that he decides to prey upon, then of course that's such a great example of what we see throughout IBLP, which is Bill kind of breaking his own teachings, the teachings he's enforced so crazy, breaking those teachings when they don't suit his own personal goals or his personal desires.
Yes, absolutely. And that was one thing I started Brooke catching him in. That was something I would say I enjoyed it, but I was like noticing at the end, I was like, this man doesn't follow his own teachings. And if I know them inside and out, I can trap him in his own teachings and flip them back on him to prevent him from abusing me. That's not the language I would have had back then, but he was spiritually abusing me. So I would flip it back on him and catch him and be like, but technically you say this, so shouldn't it be this way? And then he just throw his hands up and he'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because he would be trapped. But he was always about these teachings, like the teaching of, I think there was a huge desire in him from perfection. Like he wanted girls to look perfect. Like I remember him telling multiple girls, one girl to remove skin tags, to remove moles on your face, to lose weight, don't cut your hair, look this way. But yet he taught we were supposed, parents, that he was teaching us that we were supposed to accept ourselves as God created us. But at the same time, he was not doing that. It was him up top. He was basically God. And that's why we viewed him that way.
And he used the Bible to justify that in a lot of ways, incorrectly, of course. But he would, I always saw him positioning himself as this modern day Apostle Paul.
Yes.
And he would even use that as like kind of the reason for why he wasn't going to marry. He was like, well, the Apostle Paul never married, and so I'm kind of fitting myself into that role. And for kids who grew up, in which his teachings were kind of the primary driving force in their life, he took on a godlike role, a godlike place in your imagination, in your life.
Yes. And so when he pursues these young girls, you're taught, like, I remember my family are talking about like that he's going to be seated on the right hand of God. Like he was God. Whatever he said, do, it was like, that's what we're supposed to do and obey in scripture. There's a whole nother side of that story we could go into at some point.
Yeah.
But I mean, because he was very corrupt in some things he did, and what he was how he was operating and how he presented himself to the public was that he never wanted to get married, but that's not how he was in private. But
right.
He took these young girls in. He had so much control over them because your parents have set him up as like God. So when he rejects you, you feel, I was reading back in my journal that God must be rejecting me. God must be disappointed in me. I thought that if he could be next to God and see through me. So if there must be something in my life. And those are the girls he gravitated towards, were those who looked up to him, because then he had greater control. It was all about control.
It's all about control. It's all about power. And I think that's a kind of an interesting thing too. You know, if you want to talk about Bill Gothard in relation to other cult gained this level of influence. I think one of the things that's really unique about Bill Gothard, and has always fascinated me about it, is it does seem to be so much about power and control more than, you know, kind of your usual suspects of money and sex.
Yes. And somebody saying that about how the cult leader also portrayed himself as Apostle Paul. And there is so many subsets of this. I mean, I can think of, I don't know how I'll get in trouble for saying this, but like, even like Vision Form, you know, you've got so many other cultures that are so similar to this, where there's a leader up top who's viewed as the ultimate authority, and people worship and do everything they say. I don't know these people personally to say I know what their lives are like. I just know Bill Gothard.
Right. And I think too, like, you know, it's very much, you know, he codified patriarchy. He turned patriarchy into biblical teachings, or into a certain kind of spirituality. And when I'm talking about that, I don't mean just like the oppression of women by men. I mean the rule of the patriarchy, like its technical definition, is the rule of the father, the rule of the older male. And younger men get screwed over in this system because the old men are not going to move out of their place of authority for them. And so it's like you have this kind of almost similar it's a entire lifetime is a man in his, you know, who was born in the same decade as Bill Gothard, actually. And so we have this kind of like political and spiritual rule by this just very limited representation of everyone. And then that person ends up becoming in control and using that control to hurt everyone beneath them.
Yes, absolutely. I love the way you said that and put that. That is so true. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think about that president during my life, and with the exception of Obama, all of them were born the same exact decade as Bill Gothard, and I'm just like, good Lord, this toxic generation of people who are just hammering down on all of us.
Yes. And it's understanding, you know, where did this come from? How do we allow this to begin to perpetuate throughout our circles and our cultures?
That's a great question. I mean, that's such a great question. I spoke to a woman who's a professor at Boston College when I was doing, sorry, there's a truck, my version of the Gothard documentary. And she talked about how in the early 20th century, basically men across the board had pretty much started to flee the Christian church in America, so that the church was kind of almost entirely women in the early 20th century. And she speculated that this kind of push towards male authority and complementarianism and traditional gender roles within the American church kind of grew out of like trying to recreate space for men within it. And I thought that was an interesting idea.
That is very interesting. And it's like they kind of took the teachings and ran with it. And I feel like so many people were influenced by Bill Gothard's teachings. As we were talking about, I think the film said 3 million. I've also heard 3.5 million people have been through this basic seminar. And he targeted other people of power. And that's just how abusers work. They love other people of power. He loved politicians. He loved ministry leaders. He loved pastors. And so he taught them these ways of control and enforced it. And some of them thought, okay, I think did it blindly and thought that, oh, this is great, it's going to help people. And then some of them did it out of, they wanted the power and control themselves. And so it just kind of permeated our whole culture through his influence, and then the people they influence. And it's just, that's a a lot of people. 3.5 million and that's huge.
It's a huge number. And then the fact that I love the fact that you mentioned like him targeting other people in power, because I think that's so incredibly true. I think it's easy to think of him as this like fundamentalist, right wing, Christian minister, but he actually kind of wasn't really any of those things. He was actually this. I mean, he wasn't. To me, I don't think what Bill Gothard was teaching was Christianity. And I said that in Shiny Happy People. And it took me a lot. It was kind of funny because when I first started speaking out about it in 2015, I got attacked online by all the Christians. And then when Shiny Happy People came out, I got attacked by all the liberals because they were like, oh, this is Christianity. And I'm like, you have no idea how many years of therapy and processing and thinking and growing that it took me to get to that point. Come on.
Yes. So many years of therapy and processing. And I love that you bring that up. And I think that was kind of the shift when we first started speaking against this is, we grew up in it. And when you grow up in it, and then all of a sudden, I know for me, my whole world was falling apart. It was so painful deep inside because I was taught to suppress everything and taught to obey and taught to submit to authority, to the point I had no voice, that it was literally killing me on the inside. I didn't have words to state and describe how I'm feeling that would make sense to a normal person. I just know I'm suffering and I don't know why. And then you start deconstructing, not decompressing. You start letting all these things out, and then you're attacked by the Christians, and they're like, oh, you don't view God right, or you don't see it this way, and this isn't right. And I think a lot of that hurt a lot of people coming out is it just wasn't an awareness of how toxic these teachings are. And they're not Christianity. This is not in the Bible at all. This is a subculture that was created and then infiltrated churches. And it's meant to turn people away from God. It's not going to turn you to God because it's not of God. So
that's I couldn't agree more. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how the promise is a strong family, and yet I don't know any family that wasn't deeply hurt or even destroyed by it. The promise was, that you'll be close to God. But Jesus is almost completely absent from Gothardism. Bill Gothard never talks about Christ. He talks about the commands of Christ and emulating the character qualities that he made up in order to become more Christ-like. But ultimately what happens is, it's a super emphasis on the Old Testament law, and God the Father. And these are the things that, Christ came to free us from. Christ came to free us from our need to follow the law in order to be close to God. The promise that he gives us, that he gives in the Bible, is that if you believe in him, then you will be saved. You don't have to follow the law. And Bill Gothard's almost this kind of like modern Pharisee, in that he comes in and he takes the Bible and he twists it to suit his own purposes. And that's nothing like what Christ would do.
No. And my personal opinion is, as you know, is like Bill Gothard was not a Christian. And I worked there, and I remember walking away, like I never heard any mention of the Holy Spirit. There was no room for you to have your own personal relationship with Jesus, where God could lead you in a different direction than what your authorities taught. He even taught at one point, I know he actually still taught it, that if your heart was to go be a missionary or to go to seminary and your parents told you no, that you were to obey your parents, because perhaps they saw something in your life that made you not ready. And so you needed to submit to their grinding. He would talk about you being like a diamond in a rough, and the authority was a hammer, and they were hammering you through the imperfections. And so it was kind of like this way of ultimate control. Submit to abuse, submit to people telling you what to do, how to think, and what to be, instead of a relationship with God. And as I was saying, when I left there, by the time I was been there 3 years, I remember saying to myself, and it was a shocking revelation thought, I don't think this man knows Jesus. I don't think this man is a Christian. Like, this cannot be Christianity. This is not it. Like, it was just so suppressive and so dark, and you feel it deep inside. And so I don't believe he is a Christian. I believe that he was attracted to those he felt had a genuine walk with God and was about the power and control. He just wanted the power and control and couldn't understand what he didn't want to understand, how to submit himself to becoming Christ like himself. He just wanted it all for his own glory, which is how abusers operate.
And he seemed to have such a, you might be able to speak on this more authoritatively than I can because you were much closer to him. But to me, it seemed like he always had this very toxic, subservient relationship to his father. And his father was this big, huge in the Christian world. He was the president of Gideon's, the guy that put all the Bibles in hotel rooms, And so I've wondered if he didn't just kind of put on the Christian clothing or the cloak of Christianity as a means to both please his father, but also, be able to twist those teachings into gaining more power and control for himself.
Yeah. I mean, his father was not there. He was passed away. So his father and mother passed away by the time I was there. So I'm not familiar with that relationship. There was always an angst there between him and his parents, and those who are close to him knew that. I don't want to talk a lot into that because I'm scared he's watching these things and going to come after me. I still have fears of him coming after me. I mean, not that I'm saying anything. I'm like, oh, yeah. His family dynamic was very interesting.
The worst he said to me is tell me I'm having a midlife crisis.
He told you you were having a midlife crisis? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've gotten phone calls from him. Not since the lawsuit. I think I blocked his number, just manipulating me. It's been 5 years since I've got a phone call from him, but yeah. My thoughts oh no. But yes, no, there was a very unusual things that happened in that family, and the relationship seemed something was very off. It was a very unusual family dynamic, and I probably shouldn't go into all the details of that, but I do believe that I have seen in my work with abusers that they are attracted to power and control. And he saw himself as he loved people worshiping him. I saw himself light up when he walked into a Chick-fil-A and lit up when he went to the ATI conferences and somebody knew who he was. He loved to be admired and to be respected, and people be like, oh, I thought you were like God, and I thought you're like this. Don't challenge him. Don't question him, because if you do, he's going to cut you so hard and so fast. You're going to be removed from headquarters before you can even count to 10. So he kept people around him at all times that did everything he says, never challenged him, never questioned him, and worshiped him. And that's the epitome of an abuser, somebody that is idolizing themselves.
Yeah, I have a friend who, she and her brother went to headquarters when they were young. And, I think her brother, challenged him just a tiny, tiny bit on something he was saying in a meeting one day. And he sent both of them, home. And we went to an all ATI IBLP church. So the kids who got selected to go to headquarters were the valedictorians of our homeschool class,
Oh my God.
They were the top of the class. Everybody loved them. Everybody thought they were so great. They were, and if you came back in any kind of, everyone came back, hurt in some way.
Yes.
We had a guy that went to the first class of alert, and he came back, with a very injured leg that they never took any medical care of. There was a friend of mine who went to headquarters and developed a very severe eating disorder while she was there because she felt like there was a lot of pressure on her to be very thin and attractive. And then thinness was equated with perfectness, I think, in a lot of Gothard, in a kind of a subtextual way within the culture. I don't think there was definitely stuff in the teachings about being slender. I remember that in the wisdom booklets, but it was more of a subtextual thing. But everyone came back wounded in some kind of real way. And then the attitude at our church was, they had done something wrong. And often, families would end up leaving the church because they would be so embarrassed that their child hadn't made it at HQ or Alert or one of the programs.
That's awful. Yes. I don't know. I know people that have made it through headquarters and say they had decent experiences, but there's very few that did. And I actually, when I was there at headquarters, I ran a home. He took real juvenile delinquents. We had a juvenile delinquent program in Indianapolis, took them from their program and told them that they didn't know how to lead people, but told me I had leadership qualities. I'm going into this for a reason. And so he brought them into to me and gave me a home and told me I could have like 7 of these troubled youth at a time. I would say every single one of them at some point started struggling with eating disorders. That was very common because he put so much pressure on us to be thin. I actually struggled with an eating disorder while there and didn't know it. I remember going through a diet where I'd only eat 200 calories a day. Because if he like I had to turn people down from going overseas because they were fat. And I remember him saying, she's too chunky. She can't go to Asia. I would have to call them and tell them and find ways to be the bad person to be like, you're not accepted. And so he put so much pressure. And if he liked you and you're beautiful, then you got to give more testimonies. And the more testimonies you gave, the more you're revered and veered in his circle. And I mean, I watched him choose very beautiful girls that I felt at the time I was so confused because they'd be like, I don't have much of a testimony. And then I see girls that have really strong testimonies, but well, this girl's got a great testimony of God working in her life. And he'd like, really? And then he just push her aside. Nothing to do with her. She can be a workhorse, but we're not going to put her front and center. He just put these pretty girls front and center at all times. And he made you want to be there, and to be there, you had to be thin. You had to be, your hair had to be perfect. You had your nails done. It was extreme pressure to be beautiful there. Extreme pressure. So yes.
And I feel like that's kind of very, like a great little microcosm of kind of the program at large, is that there's so much pressure on the external. Mm-hmm. Everything's external. You've got to wear the skirt, and you've got to have the hair, and you've got to weigh a certain amount, and you've got to have this many, come from a family of this many kids, yes. And you can't have a TV, and you can't have this. And it was all very external. It was about creating an image of godliness rather than having an actual relationship with God.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes I wonder too, I'm going to ask your brain, because I love questions. Why is that? Why did he want that image so bad? What do you think was driving him? And it seemed like it was never enough. What do you think he was trying to achieve?
Oh, well, that's such a great question. I think that's like the $1 million question. Yeah. I think that, one of the things that Shiny Happy People really left out was Bill Gothard. Like, we don't really know, you don't really learn that much from the movie about, what were his motivations? What's his history? How did he interact with people? Who was he? What was his family like? What drove him to do that? And that's something that, honestly, Lauren, I'm still just trying to unravel myself, that I don't fully understand myself. I think sometimes it's hard for people like me and people like you who do have empathy for others and do feel compassion and do have values that aren't power and control, to understand people who only care about that. But I think in some real way, there was just like some kind of very deep insecurity or brokenness that nothing seemed to be ever capable of compensating for.
Yes, it seemed like he was a colander that you try to pour water in, like, you know what I mean? And it never is fulfilled. It's like, and everything he did, like all of his teachings was, this is the best conference ever. This is the new greatest teaching. This is the new thing. And it was like a constant jump to have more control, more power, to outdo the next time. And then he's at the end, as he started dwindling, he was getting angry. When his power started to get lost, and he started like taking it out on people in horrific ways.
Right.
And so it's just like, it was like a power hungry man that would do anything and everything, with himself up the top, with as many beautiful women as he could possibly get. And, as many people worshiping him, idolizing him, power, control over every nation that he can possibly get into, the president of Peru, secretary of the Philippines, whoever he could get a hold of to promote himself as an international leader.
And having the bevy of beautiful girls by him, I think makes him more, I think to him makes him feel like he seems more powerful. I look more powerful because I've got all these, I'm surrounded by young, beautiful, compliant, conditioned women. I don't want to say brainwashed because I just feel like that's just such a bad word. But in a way, those of us who grew up in the homeschool program, I mean, there's not really that much better word for what was going on.
I don't think there is any better word. I would say I was brainwashed. I had no understanding of, like, when you're so like in this subculture and you're not allowed to communicate with anybody outside your subculture because they're going to destroy your heart, you don't know any different. And they like you had mentioned in Shiny Head People, they ripped all our vocabulary from us. They taught us these things. We didn't learn a lot of subjects that we should have learned in school. Instead, we were focused on these principles and learning them. And so that was all we had.
And it's kind of funny too, because it's like now, so many of the people I feel like who have come out and spoken against Bill Gothard, yourself included, the other, my docu siblings, are people who grew up in the homeschool program. And I think that one of the reasons that happened is because, we grew up believing that we were part of something really special, something really revolutionary. I think the advertising copy was explicitly, a new approach to life, learning to do the impossible. But they educationally, emotionally, financially, psychologically, physically handicapped all of us, that we kind of, even to have a normal life, that would be the impossible. And so it's kind of a funny thing how it flipped in the opposite direction.
Yes, I am glad you mentioned that. And I kind of want to get into the impacts of these teachings too, for so many of the people who grew up in this, is that, yes, it handicapped us greatly to be able to choose spouses. Even like, you have no clue or understanding of predators, or like no understanding of boundaries or how to interact healthily with the opposite gender. It's just, everything is rule based. Just look at the rules, follow the rules. And that's going to get you in a very abusive marriage, more than likely, when you are very extremely rule based and looking for somebody to tell you what to do, and looking for somebody else that is also rule based.
Right, absolutely. There's no development. You don't spiritually develop, you don't psychologically develop, you don't educationally develop, you don't financially develop. You're just given these rules. And once you realize, I think for me at least, I realized that the rules were wrong long before I realized why they were wrong or how they were wrong. I think that's one of the reasons I've spent so much of my adult life trying to understand them, is because, I rejected the rules, but then I wasn't really left with anything. I didn't have family. I didn't have education. I didn't have a means to support myself. I didn't have what you're saying, this understanding of people. One of the reasons that you date is so that you can kind of figure out what kinds of people you like and what kinds of people you don't like. And, you might have a bad boyfriend when you're a teenager, but the stakes are really low. And then when you're thrust into the world out on your own and you're not prepared for it at all, you don't get those, you didn't have those chances to develop. And so you're kind of like, emotionally, at least for me, I felt emotionally and psychologically like I was still the 7-year-old who had been taken out of school, but I was in a 19-year-old woman's body. And that's just a recipe for abuse. And that's just a recipe for predators. I mean, I think I left my home thinking, I'm free, I'm independent. And there was just this blinking neon sign over my head that said, come take advantage of me.
Yes. And we're taught to trust everybody and all of our authorities, and you don't even know there's no teaching about predators at all under any circumstances. No. So you just think everybody's great and nice.
Like even just like red flags or things that you don't like, And I found myself in a series of abusive romantic relationships. And then eventually I kind of felt like I got a little better on that. And then suddenly I looked around at my whole friend group and was like, oh, my friends are assholes too. What do I do?
Yes.
You never learn, you don't have those experiences. Your experiences with peers are reduced to judging them for how much they're following the rules, and you're not really developing a relationship or developing an understanding of humans or developing how to communicate or cooperate with other humans in a healthy way.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So much of that. And I feel like too, we could get to a little bit, and that is like we were taught in relationships to always yield our rights, which basically meant to yield our autonomy, yield everything we desire, everything we want to the other person, because that was Christ likeness. So literally we were taught to be no one and taught to be abused in the name of Christ. And somehow that was a martyr stake. And so it's just, it makes it very challenging. And my family joined ATI when I was 17 or 16, excuse me. And I was like, this is a cult. It had nothing to do with it. I was forced into it. But I mean, I'll be honest, I went through therapy, started therapy 10 years ago. And he's like, you suffer with repressed development. You're stuck at around age 17 in this decision-making capabilities. Like, this is a therapist, because so much of our decisions were stripped from us that you make to be able to become independent, and he explained to me, like with my child, you let her choose her own clothes, and then you let her choose this, and it teaches them how to make decisions. When those things are stripped from you and you don't have them, you don't have the same capabilities as somebody else who was allowed to figure out who they are and what they liked, what they didn't like, how they expressed themselves. That was forbidden. This is one way and one way only. So trying to figure that out is you're stuck at whatever age your decision-making capability stopped at.
Right. That's really interesting. So it's kind of like how they say, like, if you become famous, you stop developing at that point, you stop growing, you're stuck at that age forever. So like, this is like the minute you join IBLP, you're just like stuck at that age.
Yes. Yeah, that apparently 17 was age for me.
Frozen in that place forever. I definitely, have experienced that. I mean, I'm older now than I was. I'm in my 40s now. I still struggle with that. There's certain aspects of it, there's ways in which I really feel like I've made huge progress, but then there's ways in which I feel like I don't know that I'll ever be able to make up for those key developmental moments.
Yes. No. And I just feel like sometimes you just live with them and you learn to go back and try to figure them out. But there is an element of feeling still young in some areas, but yet so much older in other areas than most people, just because of that. And I've seen a lot of people commenting here that they also say they grew up in cults, and that's very similar for anybody coming out of an occultic environment to these type of things. And it's so much more, people who grew up in these type of environments is so much more common than people realize. It's just people don't talk about it and don't want to tell you about their life or maybe what they experienced growing up.
I definitely have experienced that so I started talking about or speaking out against IBLP in 2015 when I published a Salon article. And I felt like at that time, from 2015 to like maybe 2023, like everybody kind of treated me like I was a freak. They were like, oh, that's that girl, who grew up in a cult. What a weirdo, that's cult girl, and that was like such a huge way in which I felt like secular people or people in my life treated me. And then, when Shiny Happy People came out, suddenly it seemed like the reaction was almost the opposite. Rather than people saying, wow, you're a weirdo, everyone's saying like, oh, the response is so much more, oh, something like that happened to me, and it's not exactly the same thing, but sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's other kinds of things like, I grew up, I'm an older woman and I wasn't allowed to really pursue my life the way that I wanted to, or, I have a different sexuality and my family rejected me because of it. So there's all kinds of ways in which I feel like we're kind of seeing this reckoning against authority that exists to control.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like it gave people a place to have a voice and to be able to express it where people can understand their backgrounds or,
Right.
you know what I mean? Without being like, for me, I just suppress it. I do talk about it within my work with Cult of Peace, but outside of that, I don't talk about it. It's just something that people are like, they'll hear like, oh yeah, you worked with Romanians. What? You did international work? And I'm like, yes, it's all an area that's very suppressed. And I don't, no, you don't want to know.
That was me before the salon piece. Like, everybody in my graduate program thought I grew up Amish, and I just left them. I was like kind of offended. I was like, hey guys, we had electricity, but I still was like, Amish, IBLP, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Yes, I've been assumed Mennonite or along those lines before too, which we did have a lot of Mennonites were in
Yes.
the IBLP program. That was very common. We did not have Amish, but we did have it. I knew several Mennonite families that were involved in the IBLP program.
We had several Mennonite families at our IBLP church, and there were also like people there was like at least one woman who had grown up Mennonite and then thought she had like completely liberated herself because now she was IBLP, and I was like, you didn't move that far, girl.
Yes. So we were somewhat conservative enough for them, but not, I don't think quite as conservative, but
right, yeah.
It was pretty close.
Yeah, I think the only big difference is the head covering.
Yes, I think that was a difference. But I don't, yeah. And I think some other things as far as dress in some of the more conservative circles was a little bit different because I enjoyed asking them about it.
And I think the big Sandy campus, which is now the IBLP headquarters, was built as a Mennonite community.
Really?
Originally, yeah.
Wow, I did not know that. Yes. And then also I wanted to talk about too is for Christians that are watching this and people that are watching this, like not Christians, people putting them separate, but like for everybody watching this, if you're a Christian, if you're not, if you're a pastor, like how can we love people that have been through cults? How can we support them? How can we walk with them instead of looking at them as in what in the world? And we also talked about this too, kind of getting both sides of this is what does it look like to walk through this and having to come into a church setting if you do choose to go into a church setting, because that is very scary. And I'm gonna be straight up honest. I'm all about honesty and conversations. Is that most people who go through ATI have gone through a very strong period of looking at their faith, because the Bible was used as a means and weapon to control and abuse you. And it made God out to be a monster. And it's very scary to hear things from other people and to know, not be afraid and put up your defenses to be like, is this person going to harm me because they are quoting this type of verse or talking about this? Because we were taught to be afraid. Now that we're healing, it's easy to be very afraid of that as we work through it. So yes, let's just hit it all.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. It's a big question. I thought you mentioned it to me, I think, when we had our like pre-conversation, and I was thinking about it. And I guess I feel like to me, the thing about people, or at least people who grow up in these kinds of environments, like you have your conscious mind, and then you also have like your subconscious mind. So your conscious mind might reject the teachings or say, okay, this isn't Christianity, but then your subconscious might be so deeply ingrained with this idea that the world is dangerous, that Satan is always trying to get you, that if you disobey, bad things are going to happen to you. God can't protect you. And that, Bill Gothard's God, who is not the God of the Bible, who's not the God of Christianity, is a really evil, scary guy. You're absolutely right about that.
Yes.
And I think, for me, being able to separate those things was a big part of my understanding and my healing journey and my growing journey, was that, what Bill Gothard said God is and what Bill Gothard said the world is, or the planet is, or that this place is. I don't mean the world as in the sense of non-Christians. I mean the world as in the planet Earth in which we live. that these things, aren't true, that this is a beautiful place, and this is a wonderful place, and it is full of wonderful experiences if you're, willing to look for them or capable of looking for them. And I think for me, just kind of stopping and looking at my beliefs and my thoughts and thinking, like, does this come from fear or does this come from a place of love? Because if something comes from fear, then it's about power and control. It comes from dominator culture, what I like to call dominator culture. And then if it's something that comes from love, then it probably comes from God or the divine, or at least some part of this human experience that is bigger and more beautiful than maybe our day-to-day existence. And I think separating those two things out for me has been really valuable in kind of understanding which beliefs I need to lean into and which beliefs I kind of still need to look away from. Because I think that the drive for perfection did a lot of damage to people, not just psychologically, but physically. There's a huge subset of people who, grew up in this IBLP subculture who still suffer with, autoimmune problems and stress problems and, deregulated nervous systems from that constant anxiety, from that constant pressure, from that constant need to perform. And I feel like it's such a tough question. Like, what can we do to love? I guess we just listen to people and love them for where they are, rather than where we want them to be.
Wow. Yes. That's beautiful.
Does that, I don't think that's a great answer.
No, everybody else is saying exactly. I see the comments coming in from YouTube. Yes, I think that is huge. And that is the opposite of what we were given at IBLP. We were not loved for who we are. It was love for what you should be, what you could be, and how you performed. And so people that are willing to love us for who we are, where we are, and say, I sit with you in this suffering. I hear you. I'm not going to run from you. That to me is everything. And that's just the opposite of what we were given there.
And I think with Christianity, as far as like people coming out of it, I do think that there is this certain group of people who, I was one of them for a long time, who just kind of rejected God and rejected the idea of God entirely and became this, I became kind of like this stereotypical, I'm a feminist Democrat atheist. And then I kind of like got to a certain point in my life where I started looking at those beliefs and realizing, well, I don't know that I really super identify with any of those either.
Yes.
Or necessarily, it's like I kind of like went in the opposite direction. Right. And I was a professor for 10 years in New York City, and I saw a lot of the same kind of dogma and a lot of the same kind of groupthink and a lot of the same kind of, you've got to go along to get along happening in academia that happened in IBLP. And I think that these things might just be endemic across our cultural institutions and across our cultural subcultures. I think this exists everywhere. IBLP, like one of the gifts I think that it gives us, gives our culture at large, is it's kind of this funhouse mirror. You can look at our own culture through this distorted mirror, but you're still always looking at our own culture.
Wow, that was profound. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, that was so good. Yes, I agree with you 100%. It's everywhere. It's still embedded in our culture. And like you said, people look at the shiny happy people watch it and maybe like, oh, this is shocking or it's like this, but it still exists. We still see it. And us who've lived it see it.
Sorry, you first. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying those who've lived it see it really quickly. Our brains are wired to see it. When we can see it coming from a mile away when we start seeing power and control, because that was what we are taught. Now that we've overcome it, that's what our brain flags as very dangerous. So we start recognizing it.
And that's something I'd like to say to everyone who's listening is I felt really like sometimes people treat like cult survivors as you're very traumatized. You've been through this horrible thing. You're damaged by it. And those things are true. I'm not denying that those things are true. I am very damaged by it. I do have a lot of trauma. But I also have this experience of living through extreme authoritarianism. I also have this experience of living through extreme control. I have this experience of being indoctrinated and propagandized and coming to realize that everything I've been told is a lie. And I think that can be a really valuable experience. And so I think valuing that about people who've been through this experience is something that people could do that would change things, instead of treating people like they're broken or they're rebellious or they're having a midlife crisis or they're angry about their childhood. Treat them as someone who's had this really valuable experience and can now recognize when those things are happening to them.
I love that. That's so beautiful. That is such a positive spin. I have not thought about that before. And it's like when we go through trials and trauma and suffering, there does come out gold. There does come out these treasures of wisdom as we process through that. And those are gifts that we have to give, and that many of us are passionate about talking about. And I love what you shared there.
Yeah, I think I went through that in my own life. I felt like, like why I was kind of treated like some kind of like, oh, this hero or this wounded bird for so many years. And then when I started to struggle, people would be like, oh, well, of course she's struggling. She's traumatized. But there wasn't it kind of in some ways erased the fact that, no, I was speaking from experience. I was warning you about these dangers that we're in because I've already been through them.
Yes. I love that. And I feel like trauma people are just so resilient and fun.
Yeah.
We're probably more the adventurous type of anybody else, like, because we've been through a lot. We're just like, yeah, most people I know have been through trauma.
And that gets like tricky because Gothard, teaches, of course, suffering makes you better. And I don't know that that's such a hard thing to say. Do we know? I don't know. I kind of think that the Brooke who got to go to school and, have a normal life is probably doing a lot better than me.
Yes.
But at the same time, it is part of your experience, and it doesn't have to be something that destroys you if it can be something that you use to help others understand more about these systems of power and control or dominator culture.
Yes. And I'm very against that cliche when it gets very triggering to me when people are like, oh yes, all things work together for good. And that's been such a process for me to learn, what does that really mean? And what does that look like? And for me, I choose to believe that means the things I go through in my life are for the greater good, in that they are used to help other people. And it does bring about redemption in my life. But I think the way that we were taught and view that as, oh, thank God that
I would want to say with you, Lauren, specifically having been a part of the lawsuit against Bill Gothard. I hope I'm allowed to say that. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, you're allowed to say that. I'm Jane Doe 4 in public.
Been a part of that, and then now doing this work, it seems to me like you also made a choice to make something good out of it. And I think that's important to point out too, because I think that it's not that there's some magical system that's making all the bad things happen to you turn into something good. You have the strength and the resilience and the love and the goodness and the courage to make that into something good.
Yes, it is definitely a choice. And I think that is something that people feel like, oh, it's just going to happen for me. It's like, no, you have to choose every single day. Like you have to make your choice to not stay in a victim mindset, because you can stay there, or you can get up and say, okay, this is what I was handed. What am I going to do with it? And I know for me and my faith and clinging to God and like feeling like he's directed me and led me, to what to do and how to do that. But I have to make those choices. I have to say, yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to walk into the unknown and things that are really scary, and I'm going to overcome, and I'm not going to stay here. I don't want to stay here. And that is definitely a daily choice.
I like that. I don't want to stay here. And that's the thing, because, you can remove your body from the cult, but it takes a really long time to get your mind out of there.
Yes, it does. It does. And I I decided to be triggered last night and go read some stuff I had wrote in 2014, which is when I started processing for the first time Bill Gothard stuff. And I was reading it from a lens of where I am now, 5.5 years, no, 10 years, excuse me, 10 years later almost. And I've been through a decade of therapy, been through, Called to Pieces 100-hour advocacy training. I understand domestic abuse, and just sat there literally shaking, looking at this, being like, oh my gosh, I believe this. This is what he did. I couldn't even remember all of it. And it's like, it's amazing to look back and be like, okay, this is hope that it's rooting itself out of me. And we're able to move further along, but it is slow and it feels like you're not making progress sometime. But when you look back, you see, wow, I've come like a really, really long ways. And that's as we keep making that daily choice to move forward, we can look back eventually and be like, wow.
But it's hard work to do. It's a hard, it's another thing that, is taken away from you. It's like you lose your childhood and then you have to spend your adulthood trying to like process it and figure it out and make up for it. And that's that's a whole nother loss. And so I guess speaking to everyone who's listening again, I would just say to be patient with those who are still in that process, because it's a lifelong process. I've made so much progress. Brooke in 2023 is not Brooke in 2010 or 2000 or even 1990s when I was part of IBLP. But it's an ongoing process, and it's not I'm not done yet.
Yes, no, I love that. And yes, it is a lot of hard work and a lot of therapy and processing through that. And yeah, I see somebody asking about our parents. I don't talk about that. So the question, nope, not going there. But yes, no, I mean, and it's like you said, I do want to highlight that is that it was for me too, definitely a loss of my early 20s, like, and things that I felt like I did not get to have. And then there is another loss, another level of loss, because it becomes a survival of overcoming, as you're trying to develop a career or trying to figure out how to live on your own when you were never taught to. And so those things are really challenging, but there's, like you mentioned, there's good moments in those things. There's still beauty to behold. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah, there are definitely good moments, and the work is definitely worth it. There's days that I wake up now and I think, oh gosh, I never thought I'd get this far.
Yes.
And that feels good, and honestly, it just makes me excited to see how much farther I can get.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, my dog is crazy.
Oh, that's okay. I love dogs. I wanted to say hi to everybody who's watching. Sorry that my phone overheated. I apologize. But I've been really enjoying talking to you.
Yes, I'm so glad that we were able to connect today. This has been, I'm so sorry. No. This has been,
I have a dog, don't worry.
She doesn't normally do this, but this has been such a good conversation. So I am so happy that you joined us here today. And I feel like it just gave me a lot of encouragement and hope myself to be able to hear some of these things from you, of just like validation and what this is like. And I love who you are and what you bring and the wisdom. And I'm so grateful that you joined us here today. And yes,
thank you so much.
Yes. And if y'all look back at the beginning, you can see her face. She was here for a brief moment and then the phone froze. And so it's just kind of been me here. So sorry about that. But yes, so thank you guys, everybody who joined. And yes, if we have any questions, we can answer them later. So thank you.